Takes life. Okay. Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to our first LightBox LinkedIn Live. I'm Karen Ashley, Head of Marketing at LightBox. This webinar is sponsored by the LightBox Diversity Council, formed to drive insights we can build upon and integrate into our evolving corporate culture with focus on education and support. LightBox is the world's leading property intelligence platform. We integrate real estate and location data solutions and facilitate industry connections with clients ranging from technology companies, government agencies, real estate developers. Our goal is to empower confident, data-driven decisions across sectors. Increasing diversity and inclusion is one of the most important challenges facing the business world, and it's a central area of focus at Lightbox. We seek to foster an environment that welcomes people from all backgrounds and walks of life. As a company with a wide range of clients, we believe a diverse workforce is crucial to success, and our commitment to inclusion runs across race, gender, religion, identity, and experience. And it's the foundation upon we operate and connect with customers and the communities in which we work. Today, we're pleased to welcome Kisa Shreen, author of Corporation Compassion Culture, Leading Your Business Towards Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as our moderator. Kisa is our moderator today. And Kisa is joined by Tiffany English, Senior Director of Architecture at Qualcomm, and Stephanie Hughes, Financial Strategist at the Tax and Financial Group. We will be sharing stories today. This year's theme of Black History Month is health and wellness. And it's very fitting as we continue to deal with physical and mental health issues, something that's been hard hitting in the African American community. Today, we'll be focusing our conversation on inclusivity, why it's important, what companies and managers can do to foster a more inclusive environment, measuring progress, and finally, we'll be concluding our conversation around advice for people who are just getting started in their career. We want you to talk to us throughout. We'll answer questions that are posed in the chat. Before we get into the discussion, I have a question for you, Kisa. Why does D&I need to be a priority for businesses, not just in CRE, but across all sectors? In other words, what's the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So thank you for that, Karen, and thank you so much for inviting me. This is a fantastic panel. And just to answer your question, first of all, the research is clear. When you put together a team with different perspectives, different strengths, different backgrounds, those are the teams that win. And Karen, for my book, I got to sit down with Mark Cuban, who's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. We also know him from Shark Tank. Mark Cuban said two things that really stayed with me. Number one, you need different strengths. Not everyone can be a point guard, if you're using a basketball analogy. Not everyone can be a forward. And also, your team must reflect your audience. I need to see someone like me who's on the team, in the game, in the boardroom, on the project. That's really important to see that reflection of your reality. So with that being said, I would love for Stephanie and Tiffany to really shine some light on this. They both entered into professions where it is an anomaly to see someone who looks like them on their team and who really reflects them when they look at them. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can evolve beyond that and get to the aspirational goal in commercial real estate, where inclusionary practices are the norm. So we're going to start off with Tiffany. Thank you so much for being here, Tiffany. First of all, what lessons have you learned as being many times the only non-white person in the room? And also, how do you think we can get to more inclusionary practices? Do we need to begin legislating or incentivizing inclusion in order to do that?
Thank you so much, Kisa. I'm really honored to be here on this panel with all of you. There's so much that I've learned over the last 25 years of being in this industry and I think some of the key things is, one is, I think even being a person of color and being Asian, I often thought I knew what it meant, what diversity meant. And I think as I've even gone on my own journey and exploration of diversity, I think I've learned a lot about what it truly means and how complicated diversity is, and really understanding the why behind what diversity means. And I think that's a really important aspiration that everyone should have. Like, what does diversity mean to you, and why is it important? So it's not just, we all know it's the right thing, and I think it feels a little cliche to say that. And I think what I've learned is that you have to really understand what the why is behind it, and then move forward with that why in being intentional towards inclusivity. So I think that has been the key for me, is really understanding the why and then being able to move forward with inclusivity, and being intentional with your actions on how to kind of tie your why into bringing in diverse perspectives. So for me, I think those are the two biggest things. I've had plenty of stories of being, walking into a room and, actually truly being the lead in the room, but having the, other people in the room ask me to go make copies, or grab coffee for the group, or it's, and I'm sure many women, and especially those of us, women of color, have probably experienced that, probably even a little bit more in a lot of our environments. So how we approach it and understanding how we speak up and add value, and something like I mentioned earlier to you, and when we were talking, that you had talked about in your book, is trying to do it with compassion and understanding, and with good intentions behind it, right? So the idea is not to bring people down when you're trying to make them aware of something that is maybe not appropriate or has made you uncomfortable, but finding a way to get them to understand, what the good intention is for everybody's voice in the room, right? The success of all. So that's kind of on the learning side. As far as legislation, I'm more of a proponent of incentives and pledges, and creating accountability for yourself. So I feel people learn more and can create culture and infuse in their DNA the right path towards diversity and inclusion, which is much more intentional. I think that creating pledges and incentives towards that, I think people respond better to that. Legislation, I think, is a tough issue. And, I know we talked about this before. I kind of ride the fence on what it means on legislation. And I'm not saying that I'm not open to hearing if there was some legislation that somehow would be beneficial. I just don't know if it always would be the right approach. But I do think that if people understand their why, make themselves accountable to the metrics of what they're trying to achieve, it can be much more I think penetrate into the DNA of the culture of either their company and themselves. So that would be where I kind of stand on that.
And love what you said about making the metrics known and really getting those things on paper. One of the things that we talk about a lot is having the qualifications, right? Those things are made known. We let everyone know that we have the degree, that we have the certification. Stephanie, you are one of the few, if not the only, that in your group, Black female RIA, registered investment advisors, that you've worked with. And I'm wondering how has that been able to distinguish you, help you distinguish your work, help you distinguish yourself and your brand in terms of your work in commercial real estate?
Well, I can definitely say that you definitely stand out. It's always like that wow factor when they do meet you, because it's very obvious that I've been putting in a lot of work. I've been really investing in myself and building myself and my certifications, and really getting my business to where I want it to be. So, and definitely having the dual discipline of also being a licensed real estate broker as well. It just really shows my commitment to, building as much as my skill set and resources to be available for my clients and to be able to create other opportunities. When you talk about the education and being ready and making sure that we're here and ready for opportunity, and for business owners or for opportunity to come our way, and to be able to be prepared to meet that opportunity.
And that's a great point, the preparedness of it. But sometimes there are some obstacles that it's just really challenging to prepare for, to be quite frankly. How do you give us an example of, an obstacle that you've had to overcome, despite having the education, the degree, and how you were able to overcome it, whether it's mentally, whether it's, going out and getting a certification? What did that consist of?
Well, you had to do your stock, with getting, doing the work and doing the education piece. But I want to say that it was two part. It was both psychological, and then it was also with being someone who, where no one looks like you. All the people who were training you will be predominantly white males, right, or people who don't look like you, and you have to trust that all of the coaching and the training and all the counsel that they're giving you, that you're going the right way. It's almost like you have blinders on. And it's very, very difficult because the industry it's hard to understand when you're getting into it, because you're stepping into an industry where, I know for the most part, I'm a Black American woman. I, by and large, come from a largely wealthless community, and I'm around and surrounded by other people who are in this profession who may have friends and family who own businesses and who are getting inheritances and wealth transferring, and they're in commerce, they have businesses, they actually, for every other group, when you think about it, when I think about it from the standpoint of a Black American, you know there isn't any industries that we control or that we own or anything. And so I'm thinking, how do I navigate in that industry, and how do I build my financial services practice that's primarily surrounding the financial realm and economics, and I don't have an affinity group. It's so funny when we're building as a financial advisor and you're trying to just get people to talk to you for your first couple of years of building business and getting people to say yes and sit down with you. When you're building in that business, you typically would go to your own community, your own market of industry, of people who own things and can be able to give you opportunities to do work. But when you don't have that and you're in a demographic where there's not very many people who look like you, your primary buyers of your business are going to be people who not look like you. So I had to get over that psychologically, and to be able to maintain my altitude and knowing that my value is not really set in my money, stuff, and things, and what I own and what I've amassed at this point, but it's really inside of me and all that I've built up as far as my skill set. And so I understand that if I'm sitting across the table from a business owner who's worth 20 or 30 million bucks, and I'm talking to this guy and I want him to be able to do business with me, I have to be able to sell myself in such a way to where that individual understands that, yeah, he may have more money than me, but what I have inside me and what I can bring to his life and to his world, or that you're either going to want me on your team or perhaps not have me on your team. It could be detrimental in the decisions that you might need to make. So I think that understanding your value and who you are and what you have to bring to the table and maintain that altitude, that confidence, it's very, very important in this industry. So that's the psychological component of it, and having to figure out a way to build when you're going into a realm all alone and by yourself. So that was probably the biggest and the scariest thing.
So that is a great point. It is many times psychological, and we talked a lot about where we have been, the struggles, the pain points, quite frankly. Let's talk about the progress and the evolution. And Tiffany, we can start with you in terms of how you think we will get to the aspirational goal. First of all, have you thought about what does the aspirational goal look like? What does success look like? And then just some steps on how we might progress to get there.
I think success looks different to a lot of people, but for me, the aspirational goal is to be able to walk into a room and see, the intersectionality of so many different perspectives, all working towards the same goal, right? So whatever that is, for me, that would be in my business, right? My team together, being able to see representative voices from, a cross section of this country and the people in my industry, just seeing it, having so many different perspectives, that it creates innovation, right? For me, I think diversity creates innovation, and innovation creates learning. And I'm a lifelong learner, right? And I love to learn. I love to be challenged in a way where, I love to hear people's perspectives that are different from mine, because it makes me think through things differently. And it allows me to challenge myself to think more creatively. And as a person with a creative background, that's super important to me. I always say, and for people who know me know that I love when somebody changes my mind. It is something where I go, oh my gosh, I just learned something new, right? And I just feel that if people can have that mindset more, that's what inclusivity is about, right? It's, inviting someone in to say, change my mind, make me think differently, teach me something new. And I think that that is, for me, having an environment like that all the time, it would just be exciting, and that type of environment. And I feel that I've made a big change in recently, and the company I work for now is on that path, right? Like ESG is important to our company, diversity of thought and diversity of perspective, and I love that. And I love that energy that's created around that, right? So that for me is the aspiration. The goal is to get to a place where nobody feels uncomfortable sharing their voice towards the success of a common goal, right? So for me, that's what the aspiration is.
And I'm wondering, does it have a certain look in your sector, in the commercial real estate sector? Would we say that this should be the goal for all sectors, for all companies, or is there something that makes the commercial real estate sector a bit different? And should we go about this sort of inclusion road mapping in a different way for the commercial real estate sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I've mentioned this before, but there's definitely visible diversity, and then there's invisible diversity, and that's where we get that intersectionality, right? So, I think it's one to have a visible, diverse group of people in the room, but for me, even more is that cognitive diversity, right? That diversity of thought, people with different experiences and different backgrounds that help change. In commercial real estate, we know that the history of real estate in general has not favored people of color, and especially Black Americans and Asian Americans for a long time. Many of us, our generations back couldn't own land for a very long time. So those type of things were built-in systematic racism that was built into really putting barriers up. So those things, some of those things are still around. So for me, commercial real estate, for more and more people to be educated and understanding of our history is one, and there's lots of layers of history here with lots of different groups, and really making intentional change to really change that environment, right? And that landscape. So that, like what Stephanie was talking about, so that, we have more people of color who are investing. And, I love seeing more financial institutions that are run by, people of color. And are we making intentional moves to, for instance, I'm very involved in CRE, and I know Stephanie is too. It's Commercial Real Estate Women. I know many of our chapters are taking intentional efforts to change over their banks to Black-owned banks, and really making sure that we're walking the talk, and we are trying to make intentional, inclusive changes that really change the landscape of commercial real estate, right? So I think the more people understand the history and can bring that with them, educate themselves, and then create environments of, intersectional, diversity of thought and diversity of landscape, I think it's only going to make our industry more successful, right? So, I think that's what's going to be key.
Great. We have a question that is targeted in this direction from the audience, and I'm going to direct this to you, Stephanie. Someone asked, why should there be a difference for commercial real estate? And so it sounds like, why should the approach be different for commercial real estate, which is almost similar, very similar what we're talking about, versus other sectors? And you can also expand on that to say, what should the differences be, as Tiffany was getting into? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think maybe the first difference, and I'm just kind of just going from what I've kind of come to understand what's happening in the territory we are, when I realized, I'm a real estate broker, and I started to ask some of the ladies and the people who work within some of these commercial real estate offices, and I just assumed that they transact and they transfer the real estate, and they said, no, they just call us agents. And so a lot of the women and they actually do a lot of admin stuff that's actually in the office. And they said it's more predominantly males who are transferring the real estate. So when they say, what the difference should be, I can tell you, coming from the, transferring a lot of residential real estate in my history and knowing a lot of other real estate brokers who are women, that's very common on the residential side. But it seems that on the commercial side, when you're dealing with commercial property, when it's talking about business and commerce, that's all dominated by males. So I guess the question that they're asking, as far as why should there be a difference, I'm not exactly sure what they're getting at. As far as, I don't know if Kisa, if you can kind of tell me a little bit more about what they're getting at. Why should there be a difference?
Sure. Well, our approach, you talked about residential and versus commercial. And if we look at the approach to inclusion, if there are higher levels of inclusion in one versus the other, first of all, is that the case? Do you? And I know you've worked on both.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would definitely say absolutely it's a case that it is different. And I think that there's been a lot of progress. And I'm seeing a lot more Black people being more involved in real estate. And, I can definitely say that you can definitely see that happening. But I think it's more of an access thing. And I also know that's also an education thing. I think commercial real estate is run completely different. It has a lot to do with knowing your market, knowing the different types of property, commercial types. There's a lot of training and a lot of, I would say, the way that you get into those particular industries are very different. How you would thrive and develop your residential real estate practice is very different than a commercial practice. And a commercial practice is going to require that you have some sort of senior mentor or someone who's going to be kind of I want to say welcoming you into the industry, but training you, and like a senior mentor. It's very similar to how it is even in financial advising as well. So your success, I would probably say, has a lot to do with your experience and where you get that training and mentorship. So perhaps maybe the difference needs to be where, maybe some of these organizations who are looking to have more of a diverse commercial real estate presence, perhaps they're, reaching out, and maybe, maybe it's going to be more of kind of, even when I was in a meeting this morning with the BIA, it was a wonderful women's leadership meeting, and they were talking about how things might need to be said, and kind of planting that seed and letting people understand and know that, hey, maybe you can do this, maybe there's something that you should take a look at. And I'm sure that even in my career, when I was actually doing a lot of residential real estate, someone might have, hey, this is something you should get into, and I think that that's what we need, is that encouragement, someone to plant that seed. So,
and one of the things too, you're talking about key differences. I'm assuming that a huge difference perhaps is the pay structure for a worker on the commercial side versus the residential side. And
absolutely. The difference is a vernacular. And then it's also a lot of work that you have to put into really just knowing your territory and the different buildings that are available, and then of course you got to have business commerce and be able to have connections on that front as well. So I think that it has to do a lot to do with just positioning and access and just being in that realm. And then of course your development and training within that industry. So, and those are all things that I think that are steps, but I think that they have to be encouraged and supported. I don't think it's something that would, that can come without, I guess, the welcoming, if you will. That's what I would say.
That takes a lot of work, Stephanie. Everything that you mentioned, the learning and the understanding, that takes a lot of work. And another thing that takes quite a bit of work too is getting down to the why. Why should I care? Why should I involve myself? Why should I reach out? And so I want to ask each of you, thinking through the why should commercial real estate be an inclusive place for all, no matter what the background is, what the orientation is? Why should it be that? And why should brokers and others who are in the field, why should they care about the direction of commercial real estate in terms of its inclusionary practices? And Tiffany, we can start off with you.
Sure. Well, I mean, we can go to the obvious. It's good for the bottom line. And we all know this, right? Like any business, and I think across all industries, it's the statistics are there, the numbers are there, and the numbers don't lie, right? So when you have increased diversity and perspectives and inclusivity and equity, and I think that it's good for business, right? Because then I think I mentioned it before, because it creates innovation and it creates new approaches, right? People, the innovation can spur new business, ideas out of that, right? And I think it's good for business, but it's also good for me. and we talked about the servant leadership and seeing potential in others. And I think Stephanie hit on it too, and finding the ability to increase the pipeline of, people involved in our industry will only increase the ability for our industry to evolve, right? So it doesn't stay stagnant in kind of, only men doing the transactions. That has to change. And for it to change, we need more women, across the board, to be involved, and for them to have advocates and sponsors and allies who are going to pull them up, teach them how to, make those transactions happen. And the more you have that, I think you're going to see an increase in, companies who embrace this. They will have, their businesses will flourish. And I think that is, in the end, you can't, that's one way to look at it. For me, it's just, I think that I feel very, I love to see others succeed, right? So, if you can see others succeed, you can see potential in them that they might not even see in themselves, and you help them and show them how to embrace what you see that they might not. You're going to, it's a legacy that you leave, right? In the end, right? It feels good to teach others how to grow and to be successful, and I think that's that, for me, that's my why, right? Like, I love to see people be successful, and I judge my success on the success of others that I've been able to help. Whether I don't need to basically be rewarded for that. I think the reward enough is to see them succeed, right? So that is my why. But I think for businesses, it's the bottom line, right? We know it increases revenue, in many ways.
Great. Thank you for that. Stephanie, same to you. If I'm not from an underrepresented community, why should I care? Is there an issue with giving up my seat for someone else who is from an underrepresented community? And is that taking a slice of pie, if you will, away from me? Why should I care?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, I'll definitely echo what, Tiffany is saying, but you definitely, it speaks to their interest, of wanting to grow. I think a lot of times times are changing. And I think that, we're seeing how much our culture and social society is changing, and the innovation that we have amongst it's a very ripe ground, of all these wonderful people that can come up within your organization, and those fresh ideas. You wouldn't get access to those. So I think that part of it could be just vital to growth and vital to being able to sustain long term for some of these companies and businesses that want to stay in business, and for their businesses to continue to last beyond them. I think that would be a very good reason because there's a lot of wonderful ideas and innovation there. So, and I think that that's very key. And that's something that you couldn't put a price tag on, right? They say priceless. So I think that would be what I would say, that would be why I would do it, because at this point, they got to have a lot of money already. So beyond the bottom line and, perhaps maybe not the feel good stuff of wanting to be a servant, I would probably say for long-term sustainability and innovation for long-term growth.
And what a perfect way to wrap up this segment of it. Why should we be interested? Why should folks from an underrepresented group, as well as those who are not from underrepresented groups? It helps the bottom line. We've talked about stories of inclusion and lack of inclusion, and how we can evolve to that next level. And really, that next level has to do with the work that we do today. So thank you so much for your comments and your answers. And Karen, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know that there might be younger people who are just getting started in their careers, listening to us talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's important for business. But I just want, if I had advice from my younger self, I would say that I would continue to get involved and to look around, look for people who can mentor you. If you don't, if there's not a formal mentor program at your company, perhaps you can seek someone out who might, show you and mentor you in the area that you're in. I would also say that look for cohorts, people who are like you, and form your own tribe so that you can encourage yourself. I think very often we think that we're the only one. We think that there isn't anyone who doesn't care, but we don't lend our voice or seek out. So that's definitely something to think about and to do. I'd like to thank our panelists, our moderator today for our, who came along, Tiffany, Stephanie, Kisa. Thank you very much. Thank you to Lightbox and the Diversity and Inclusion Council, to Mary and to Eric, Albert, those who sponsored this conversation. I'd like to conclude just by saying, sharing a quote that I heard this weekend. It's from Chuck Swindoll, and Chuck says that life is mostly froth and bubbles. The thing that lasts is the kindness we extend to others and the courage we have for ourselves. We've come to the end of the conversation talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we don't have to stop talking about it. This forum is closing, but continue to talk about it. Continue to think about being intentional, about being inclusive. If you're in someone of position, think about someone who may need a leg up, who may need a hand, and look for that. And I think once we are aware, then we have a bit of a responsibility. And if you feel like you're alone, there are others. Lend your voice, speak to someone, talk to someone. Sometimes people who might be in the office seem closed off, but they're probably lonely in there. So just, say, hey, would you like to go for coffee or something like that? Open the door and continue to treat others with kindness and treat yourself with courage. Thank you from everyone at Lightbox. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great Wednesday. Goodbye.